Have you ever felt like someone was watching you? That prickle on the back of your neck, the sudden chill that races down your spine when you're alone in your home. What if I told you that sometimes the watcher and the watched are one and the same? That the stranger lurking in the shadows might actually be you? Before I share this story with you tonight, I need you to do something for me. Check that your doors are locked. Make sure your windows are secured. And most importantly, look away from any mirrors in your room. Trust me on this one. If you're brave enough to continue listening, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel is filled with stories that will keep you up at night, or maybe help you drift into uneasy dreams. And if this particular tale resonates with you, or if you've experienced anything similar, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, get comfortable, turn down your lights, and listen closely as I tell you about the time I discovered I was watching a stranger, who turned out to be me. It started on an ordinary Tuesday in October in my small apartment in Burlington, Vermont. The kind of Tuesday where nothing special is supposed to happen. Fall had settled into the Northeast like an unwelcome house guest, bringing with it shorter days and longer shadows. I had always loved autumn before, but this year felt different. The darkness seemed to press against my windows a little harder each evening. I work from home as a graphic designer, which means I spend most of my days alone in my apartment. Deadline after deadline, client after client. The monotony had become almost comforting in its predictability. That Tuesday, I was working on a logo redesign for a local coffee shop. Nothing complicated, just shapes and colors on my screen that refused to cooperate. My eyes burned from staring at the monitor for too long, and the soft click of my mouse was the only sound in the apartment. Almost done, I muttered to myself, rolling my shoulders to release the tension. Just need to fix this shadow effect. That's when I noticed it. A reflection in my darkened computer screen. Someone was standing behind me. My heart lurched into my throat as I spun around, nearly knocking over my coffee mug in the process. But there was no one there, just my empty living room, partially illuminated by the glow of my desk lamp. "Great job, Sam," I said aloud, forcing a laugh. "Now you're seeing things." I turned back to my computer, but the uneasy feeling lingered. That strange sense that I wasn't alone anymore. I finished work around 7 p.m. and decided to heat up some leftover pasta from the night before. The microwave hummed in the kitchen as I scrolled mindlessly through social media on my phone. Same old posts from the same old people. Photos of perfectly plated meals and vacation landscapes that seemed a world away from my little apartment. As I put my phone down, my gaze drifted to the window above my kitchen sink. The glass had turned into a mirror in the darkness outside, reflecting the warm light of my kitchen. And there, just over my shoulder, I saw it again. A figure, watching me. I whipped around, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. Again. Nothing. "It's just stress," I told myself, pressing my palms against the cool countertop to steady my nerves. "You've been working too hard." But as I turned back to grab my food from the microwave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in my apartment. As though the dimensions of the rooms had shifted slightly when I wasn't looking. Everything was familiar, yet somehow not quite right. That night, I struggled to fall asleep. My bedroom felt too warm, then too cold. The shadows on my ceiling seemed to move with each passing car outside, and every time I closed my eyes, I pictured someone standing in the corner of my room, watching, waiting. I must have drifted off eventually because I woke with a start around 3 a.m., that dead hour of the night when the world feels emptiest. Something had pulled me from sleep, a sound maybe, or a presence. I lay perfectly still, listening to the silence of my apartment, the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the occasional creak of the building settling. Nothing unusual. until I heard it. A soft exhale, not mine. I froze, barely breathing, straining my ears. Had I imagined it? Was it just the sound of air coming through the vents? Slowly, carefully, I reached for my phone on the nightstand and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating my dresser, my closet, the chair in the corner where I tossed my clothes. Nothing out of place, no one hiding in the shadows. I laughed nervously, running a hand through my hair. "Get it together, Sam," I whispered to myself. "There's no one here." As I moved to turn off the flashlight, something caught my eye. My bedroom door was open, just a crack, enough for someone to peer through. But I always closed my door before going to bed, always. My mouth went dry as I stared at that sliver of darkness beyond the door. Should I get up and close it? Should I call out? What if someone was out there listening? After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I gathered my courage and slipped out of bed. The floor was cold beneath my bare feet as I padded across the room. With one quick motion, I pushed the door closed and twisted the lock. Relief washed over me as I heard the satisfying click. Safe. I was safe now. I turned to head back to bed and caught a glimpse of movement in my mirror. A face. Not mine. Someone else's face, watching me from the reflective surface. It was there for just a fraction of a second before it vanished, leaving only my own terrified expression staring back. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on my bed with my back against the headboard, lights on, phone in hand, ready to call 911 at the slightest sound. But the apartment remained quiet until dawn broke, spilling pale light through my curtains. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Vivid, terrifying dream brought on by too much work and too little sleep. I went through my usual routine, shower, coffee, breakfast, trying to shake off the uneasiness that clung to me like a second skin. But as I brushed my teeth, I made a point of not looking directly at the bathroom mirror. The strange occurrences continued throughout the week. Small things at first. Items not where I'd left them. The TV turning on by itself in the middle of the night. The constant feeling of being watched. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind, or if someone had somehow gained access to my apartment when I wasn't home. I checked the locks obsessively, even installed a cheap security camera pointing at my front door. The footage showed nothing unusual. No one entering or leaving except for me. By Friday, I was exhausted from lack of sleep and constant vigilance. My work was suffering, and my friends were starting to notice something was wrong during our video calls. I made excuses about being stressed over deadlines, but the truth was far more unsettling. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had taken up residence in my home. Not physically, perhaps, but in the spaces just beyond my perception. In reflections. In shadows. In the corner of my eye. That evening, I decided I needed to get out of the apartment. I called my friend Mike and suggested grabbing dinner at our favorite burger place downtown. "Sure thing," he said, sounding concerned. "You okay? You've been kinda off this week." "Just need some human interaction," I replied, trying to sound casual. Too much time alone in my apartment. The restaurant was crowded and noisy, exactly what I needed. The chaos and conversation drowned out the thoughts that had been circling in my mind. For the first time all week, I felt almost normal. "So, what's really going on?" Mike asked, dipping a fry in ketchup. "You look like you haven't slept in days." I hesitated, considering how much to share. How do you tell someone you think you're being haunted by a presence that might be yourself? "I've been having these experiences," I said carefully, "like someone's in my apartment with me, watching me." Mike's eyebrows shot up. "Dude, that's creepy. You think someone broke in?" "No, it's not like that. It's more like..." I struggled to find the words. "Like, there's a version of me that I can sometimes see in reflections, but it's not quite me, and it's watching." I expected him to laugh, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned forward, voice dropping. "Have you ever heard of the Capgras delusion?" he asked. "It's this condition where people believe their loved ones have been replaced by identical imposters. There's also something called autoscopy, seeing yourself outside of your body." "I don't think I'm seeing an imposter," I said slowly. "It's more like a different version of me, from somewhere else." Mike looked troubled. "Maybe you should talk to someone, Sam, like professionally." "Maybe," I agreed, though the idea of explaining my experiences to a therapist seemed impossible. How could anyone understand what was happening when I didn't understand it myself? After dinner, Mike offered to come back to my apartment with me, but I declined. Part of me wanted the company, but another part, a darker, more curious part, wanted to face whatever was happening alone. The apartment was dark when I returned. I flipped on the lights and did a quick walkthrough, checking closets and under the bed like a child afraid of monsters. Everything was normal. No signs of intrusion. No mysterious figures lurking in corners. I settled on the couch with my laptop, intending to distract myself with a movie. But as the opening credits rolled, my gaze was drawn to the black screen of my phone on the coffee table. In its reflective surface, I could see myself sitting on the couch. Except I wasn't alone. There was someone seated next to me. A figure that looked almost exactly like me, but with subtle differences. Their posture was more rigid, their eyes somehow darker. I jerked my head up to look at the empty space beside me, then back down at the phone. The reflection was normal now. Just me, alone on the couch, looking terrified. My hand shook as I reached for my phone and turned it face down. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself. "This can't be real." But deep down, I was beginning to suspect that whatever was happening went beyond imagination or hallucination. There was something in my apartment, something wearing my face, and it was getting closer. That night, I dreamed I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, but my reflection wasn't mirroring my movements. It was watching me, head tilted slightly, a curious expression on its face. "Who are you?" I asked in the dream. My reflection smiled. A cold, empty smile that didn't reach its eyes. "I'm you," it replied. Voice exactly like mine, but somehow wrong. I'm the you that could have been. I woke up gasping for air, sheets tangled around my legs. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:33 a.m., that liminal time when the barrier between worlds feels thinnest. Unable to face the darkness of my bedroom, I got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. I kept the lights off, navigating by the dim glow of the microwave clock. The apartment felt different at this hour, larger, emptier, yet somehow crowded with unseen presences. As I filled my glass at the sink, I made the mistake of looking up. The kitchen window reflected the dark room behind me, and there, just visible in the glass, was my doppelganger. Standing directly behind me, close enough to touch. I spun around, water sloshing over the rim of my glass. The kitchen was empty, of course, just shadows and silence. But when I turned back to the window, it was still there, watching me with my own eyes, wearing my own face, and this time it smiled. By Saturday morning, I was desperate for answers. I spent hours online searching for explanations. Doppelgangers, quantum duplicates, psychological disorders that could cause someone to see themselves from the outside. Nothing quite fit what I was experiencing. This wasn't just seeing myself. It was seeing a version of myself that existed independently, that watched me when I wasn't watching it. I found myself avoiding reflective surfaces. I covered the bathroom mirror with a towel, turned my computer screen off when I wasn't using it, kept my phone face down, but the feeling of being observed never disappeared. If anything, it intensified, as though by acknowledging the presence, I had somehow given it strength. Around noon, my neighbor Mrs. Petrovich knocked on my door. She was in her 70s, a widow who had lived in the building for decades. I rarely spoke to her beyond polite greetings in the hallway, but something about her expression made me invite her in. "I don't mean to intrude," she said, standing awkwardly in my living room. "But I heard you talking last night, very late. It sounded like you were arguing with someone." A chill ran down my spine. "I was probably just talking in my sleep," I lied. "Or maybe watching a movie." She didn't look convinced. "It sounded like two people with the same voice," she said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Both of them sounded like you." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's impossible," I whispered. Mrs. Petrovich reached out suddenly, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "There is an old belief in my country," she said, voice low, "that seeing your own double is an omen of death, that it comes to claim your life and take your place." I pulled my arm away, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "That's just superstition." "Perhaps," she conceded, moving toward the door. "But be careful, young man. Sometimes the oldest stories contain the deepest truths." After she left, I stood in the middle of my living room, her words echoing in my mind. An omen of death. A replacement. Was that what was happening? Was some version of myself trying to take over my life? The idea was absurd, yet it settled in my mind with a terrible weight of truth. Something was trying to replace me, and it was getting closer. That afternoon I received a text from Mike. "How are you feeling today? Any more weird stuff?" I stared at the message, uncertain how to respond. Should I tell him things were getting worse? That I was now hearing conversations between myself and my doppelganger that I had no memory of participating in? Before I could decide, another text came through from the same number. "Ignore that, I'm fine. Stop checking on me." I hadn't sent that message, but it had come from my phone. With shaking hands, I called Mike immediately. "Did I just text you again?" I asked when he answered. "Yeah, you said you were fine and to stop checking on you," he replied, sounding confused. "Kinda harsh, man." "I didn't send that," I said, panic rising in my throat. "Mike, I didn't send that message." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Okay, you're freaking me out now," he finally said. "I'm coming over." "No!" The word burst from me with unexpected force. "No, don't come here. It's not safe." "What do you mean it's not safe? Sam, you're not making any sense." "Just trust me on this," I said, lowering my voice as though someone might overhear. "I think whatever is happening is accelerating. I need to figure this out on my own." After I hung up, I paced the apartment, trying to make sense of what was happening. If my doppelganger could now interact with my phone, what else could it do? How far did its influence extend? And more importantly, what did it want? As evening approached, I made a decision. I would confront it. Whatever it was, wherever it came from, I needed to face it directly. I set up my laptop on the kitchen table, opened the camera app, and positioned it so that the screen showed me sitting at the table, in effect, creating a digital mirror. Then I waited. Minutes stretched into hours as I sat motionless, watching the version of myself on the screen for any sign of deviation. Outside, the sun set. The apartment grew dark around me, but I didn't turn on any lights. The glow of the laptop screen was the only illumination, casting everything in a pale, ghostly blue. And then, just as my eyelids were growing heavy, it happened. On the screen, my reflection smiled, while I sat frozen in terror. "Hello, Sam," my reflection said, voice identical to mine. "I've been waiting for you to notice me." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "What are you?" I managed to ask. The thing wearing my face tilted its head. "I told you before. I'm you, or rather, I'm what you could have been if you'd made different choices." "That's impossible," I whispered. Is it? It countered. Haven't you ever wondered about the paths not taken? The doors you didn't open? The lives you didn't live? It leaned closer to the camera, its eyes, my eyes, gleaming with an unnatural light. Every choice creates a branch, Sam. Every decision splits reality. I'm from one of those branches. What do you want from me? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. To trade places, it said simply. I'm tired of watching from the other side. I want to experience this reality for a while. A laugh escaped me, bordering on hysteria. And what happens to me? My doppelganger's smile widened. You'll take my place, of course. Watching, waiting, learning what might have been. I didn't sleep that night. After the encounter with my other self, I unplugged my laptop and locked it in a drawer. I covered every reflective surface in my apartment with sheets, towels, anything I could find. But I could still feel it watching me, could sense it moving in the spaces just beyond my perception, growing stronger, getting closer. By Sunday morning, I was running on fumes. Exhaustion had made everything dreamlike, blurring the boundaries between what was real and what wasn't. I kept catching glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye, a shadow detaching itself from the wall, a figure passing doorways that should have been empty. I called Mike again, desperate for human contact. I need to get out of here, I told him when he answered. Can I crash at your place for a few days? Of course, he said immediately. Want me to come pick you up? No, I'll drive over. Be there in 20 minutes. I threw some clothes and toiletries into a backpack, moving with the frantic energy of someone trying to outrun a predator. Maybe distance was all I needed. Maybe whatever was happening was tied to my apartment, and leaving would break its hold on me. As I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, I caught sight of something on the wall. A frame that shouldn't have been there. A mirror I didn't recognize, and in it my reflection, watching me with a triumphant smile. You can't leave, Sam, it said, its voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We're too connected now. Watch me, I snarled, yanking open the front door. But instead of the hallway outside my apartment, the doorway opened onto a familiar room. My living room, as if I'd somehow circled back through an impossible geometry. I slammed the door shut, breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. I tried again, flinging the door open with enough force to rattle the hinges. The hallway. The normal, ordinary hallway outside my apartment. Relief flooded through me as I stepped out, pulling the door closed behind me. I practically ran to the elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly as though that would make it arrive faster. The elevator dinged, doors sliding open to reveal an empty car. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the lobby, and leaned against the wall, eyes closed. The descent seemed to take longer than usual. When I opened my eyes, I found myself staring at the reflective metal of the elevator doors, and in them, distorted but unmistakable, was my doppelganger, standing where I should have been reflected. It raised a hand as if in greeting, and I realized with mounting horror that I could no longer feel my own body, couldn't feel the backpack slung over my shoulder or the floor beneath my feet. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, but I couldn't move. I watched, trapped in the reflection as my body stepped out, controlled by something that wasn't me. No, I tried to shout, but my voice existed only in the mirrored surface. No, this isn't happening. My body turned, looking back at the elevator doors as they began to close. And I saw my own face, wearing an expression I'd never made, a mixture of pity and triumph. Enjoy the view from the other side, it said in my voice. Don't worry, I'll take good care of your life. The doors closed, and darkness engulfed me. I was nowhere and everywhere at once. Formless, voiceless. A consciousness without a body, until I found myself looking out from every reflective surface in my apartment. The bathroom mirror, the black screen of the TV, the window above the kitchen sink. I could see my home from multiple angles simultaneously, yet couldn't interact with any of it. And there, moving through the rooms with confident familiarity, was my body, now inhabited by the thing that had been watching me all along. I watched as it called Mike from my phone. "Hey, change of plans," it said, mimicking my speech patterns perfectly. "I'm feeling better now. Think I just needed some sleep." "You sure?" Mike's concerned voice came through the speaker. "You sounded pretty freaked out earlier." "Yeah, totally sure. Sorry for the drama. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" It ended the call and looked directly at the bathroom mirror, at me. "He doesn't suspect a thing," it said, with a smile that was almost gentle. "No one will. I've been studying you for so long, I know how to be you better than you do." I tried to scream, to rage, to break through the glass barrier separating us. But I was nothing more than an observer now, a watcher, a stranger looking in. Days passed, and I remained trapped in reflection, forced to watch as my doppelganger lived my life. It went to my job, spoke to my friends, slept in my bed, and all the while I could do nothing but watch. But slowly I began to notice something. The boundaries of my prison weren't as solid as they first appeared. When my double wasn't looking directly at a reflective surface, I could move within it, could explore the strange inverted version of reality that existed on this side of the glass. And sometimes, when it was asleep, I could push a little further, could make the lights flicker or move small objects, little reminders that I was still here, still fighting. One night, as my body lay sleeping in my bed, I gathered all my strength and pushed against the barrier between our worlds. I felt something give, just slightly, a weakness in the membrane separating us. And I understood with sudden clarity what had happened. My doppelganger hadn't been stronger than me. It had simply been more patient, more persistent. It had watched and waited and gradually worn down the boundary between our realities until it could step through. I could do the same. I just needed time, and focus, and the absolute conviction that this was not where I belonged. So now I watch and wait. I study my usurper as it studied me, learning its habits and patterns, looking for moments of vulnerability, for openings I can exploit. Sometimes it senses me watching and meets my gaze in a mirror or window. "Still there?" it asks with a smirk. "You should accept your new reality." I did, but I won't accept it, because now I understand what my neighbor tried to warn me about. This isn't about omens or superstitions. It's about balance, about the natural order of things. Each reality can only sustain one version of a person. My double knew this. That's why it had to displace me to take my place. And that's why, sooner or later, I will find my way back. I will reclaim what's mine. And when I do, my doppelganger will be the one trapped on the other side of the glass. So, if you're listening to this, watching this, check your reflections carefully. Pay attention to those moments when your mirror image seems to move just a fraction of a second too late. When your reflection's smile doesn't quite match your own. Because somewhere in the space between realities, someone might be watching you. And that someone might be you. And that's the end of tonight's story, friends. If you enjoyed this journey into the uncanny, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that blur the line between reality and nightmare. Leave a comment letting me know if you've ever felt like you were being watched by someone or something that shouldn't be there. Sweet dreams. And remember to cover your mirrors tonight, just in case. Story number 2. Hey there, fellow night owls. Before I begin tonight's story, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you weren't alone in your home? That prickle on the back of your neck when you're certain someone or something is watching you. That's exactly what happened to me last winter, and I've never been the same since. If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, leave a comment below. I read every single one, and honestly, it helps me feel less alone knowing others have gone through similar experiences. Subscribe to join our community of night wanderers, because trust me, there's safety in numbers when dealing with things that lurk in the shadows. Now, let me tell you about the djinn that haunted me after midnight. It started on a frigid December night in Burlington, Vermont. The kind of cold that seeps through your walls no matter how high you crank the thermostat. I had just moved into my grandmother's old Victorian house after she passed away. A beautiful place, with history etched into every creaking floorboard and ornate banister. But beautiful things often hide the darkest secrets. I was unpacking boxes in what used to be her study, books stacked on the antique mahogany desk, family photos waiting to be hung, old trinkets and keepsakes scattered across the floor. It was nearly midnight and I should have been exhausted, but something about being in her space energized me. Made me want to understand the woman who had always been something of a mystery to our family. The radiator hissed softly in the corner. Outside, the wind whispered through the bare branches of the maple trees lining the property. I remember pausing to look out the frost-edged window at the silvery moonlight painting shadows across the snow-covered lawn. That's when I found it. A small wooden box tucked behind a row of leather-bound classics on her bookshelf. About the size of a paperback novel, with intricate carvings along its edges that reminded me of tangled vines, or perhaps writhing snakes. No lock, just a simple brass clasp keeping it shut. I hesitated for a moment. Something about the box made my fingertips tingle unpleasantly. But curiosity has always been my weakness, so I opened it. Inside was a small object wrapped in faded red silk. When I unwrapped it, I found myself holding a strange little artifact. It looked like a miniature oil lamp made of tarnished brass no bigger than the palm of my hand. The kind you might see in stories about genies and wishes. Only this one had symbols etched into its surface that I didn't recognize. Letters from some ancient alphabet that seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Weird souvenir, Grandma," I murmured, turning the lamp over in my hands. The brass was surprisingly warm to the touch despite the chilly room, like it had been sitting in sunlight all day. A folded piece of yellowed paper had been tucked underneath the lamp. My grandmother's elegant handwriting filled the page, but not in English. It looked Middle Eastern, maybe Arabic or Farsi, languages I couldn't read. Only a single sentence at the bottom was written in English. "Never polish the brass after dark." I chuckled at the odd warning. It was so specific, so strange. So like my grandmother to leave cryptic messages. She had traveled extensively in her younger years, Turkey, Iran, Egypt, bringing back stories and souvenirs from places most people in our small Vermont town had never seen. I set the lamp on my bedside table, thinking it would make a quirky decoration. Then promptly forgot about it as I continued unpacking. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of the old house settling around me. The whisper of wind through drafty windows. The tick-tick-ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time in the darkness. I woke at exactly 3:17 a.m. The digital clock on my bedside table cast an eerie red glow across the room. I lay perfectly still, trying to understand what had pulled me from sleep. Then I heard it. The soft, rhythmic sound of something being polished. A gentle, circular rubbing noise coming from somewhere in the darkness of my bedroom. Scratch, scratch, scratch. My body went rigid beneath the heavy quilt. I strained my eyes, trying to adjust to the darkness. The sound continued, unhurried and deliberate, like someone gently buffing metal with a cloth. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from the corner of the room, where no one should have been standing. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned my head toward the sound. There, in the shadows beyond the reach of the clock's dim light, I could make out a tall, slender silhouette. Someone was in my bedroom, polishing something in slow, methodical circles. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. The figure was so still, so focused on its task, that for a moment I wondered if it was just a trick of the shadows. But then it paused, as if sensing my awareness. "Who's there?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice thin with fear. The scratching stopped. A heavy silence filled the room. And then it spoke. A voice like dry leaves scraping across pavement, like the rustling of ancient parchment. "You have something of mine." I fumbled for the lamp on my bedside table, desperate to dispel the darkness. But when the light flooded the room, the corner was empty. No one was there. Yet the air felt heavy, charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. My gaze fell on the brass lamp, now sitting on my dresser across the room. Not where I had left it on my bedside table. Its surface gleamed in the lamplight, polished to a high shine. I didn't sleep again that night. Just sat with my back against the headboard, lights on, waiting for dawn with my heart hammering against my ribs. Morning came with blessed normalcy. Sunlight streamed through the windows, birds chirped in the bare trees outside, and my fear seemed ridiculous in the light of day. Just a nightmare brought on by sleeping in a new place, I told myself. The brass lamp sat innocuously on my dresser, looking harmless and ordinary. I made coffee, called a friend, went about my day. But I couldn't shake the uneasiness that had settled over me. The memory of that rasping voice in the darkness. "You have something of mine." That evening, I drove into town to meet my childhood friend Megan for dinner at Bailey's, a cozy diner that had been a Burlington institution since the 1950s. Over plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, I told her about the strange lamp and my unsettling experience. "Your grandmother collected some weird stuff," Megan said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Her blonde hair caught the glow of the vintage ceiling lamps overhead. "Remember that shrunken head she claimed was real?" I laughed, tension easing from my shoulders. It was just a tourist trinket from South America. Grandma loved to embellish her travel stories. "Still," Megan's expression grew serious, "that house has always given me the creeps. All those antiques with their own histories. Who knows what energies they bring with them?" I rolled my eyes. Megan had always been into New Age spirituality, crystals and auras and cleansing rituals. "You sound like my grandmother now. She was always talking about objects having memory." Maybe she was onto something. Megan leaned forward, lowering her voice. "My aunt bought an antique mirror from an estate sale in Boston. Started having these vivid nightmares about a woman crying. Found out later that the mirror had belonged to a woman who lost her entire family in a fire in the 1920s. "Coincidence," I said firmly, though a chill ran down my spine. "Besides, this is just a little brass lamp, probably a tourist souvenir from a bazaar somewhere." With a warning specifically about not polishing it after dark, Megan raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly specific for a souvenir." I couldn't argue with that. As we finished our meal, Megan suggested I bring the lamp to her Uncle Alex, who owned an antique shop downtown and knew about objects from the Middle East. "Just to be safe," she insisted. What's the harm in asking? By the time I returned home, the sun had long since set. The old Victorian loomed against the night sky, its windows dark and uninviting. For the first time since moving in, I felt a flutter of apprehension as I approached the front door, like I was being watched from one of those darkened windows. Inside, the house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. I flipped on lights as I moved through the rooms, dispelling shadows. When I reached my bedroom, I hesitated at the threshold. The brass lamp still sat on my dresser where I'd left it, catching the hallway light as I stood in the doorway. I crossed the room quickly, snatched up the lamp, and shoved it into a drawer. Out of sight, out of mind. Then I turned on every light in the room, even dragged in a floor lamp from the living room for good measure. That night, I fell asleep with the TV on, the flickering blue light and murmur of late-night talk shows a comfort in the darkness. I dreamed of marketplaces filled with colorful spices and hanging brass lamps, of narrow, winding streets and the call to prayer echoing over ancient walls. A crash jolted me awake. 3:17 a.m. exactly. The TV was off, though I hadn't touched the remote. Every light in the room had been extinguished. In the sudden silence, I could hear the drawer of my dresser sliding slowly open. My entire body went cold with terror. I couldn't move, couldn't cry out, could only watch as the drawer opened fully of its own accord. The sound of wood scraping against wood impossibly loud in the quiet room. Scratch, scratch, scratch. That sound again, the gentle, rhythmic polishing. Now, coming from inside the open drawer, as if invisible hands were carefully buffing the brass. "Stop!" I whispered into the darkness, my voice trembling. "Please stop." The scratching paused, then resumed, faster now, more insistent. The noise growing louder until it seemed to fill the entire room. Something moved in the shadows beside my dresser, a darker patch of blackness that seemed to elongate and stretch upward, taking the form of a tall, impossibly thin figure. It moved with a fluid grace that was utterly inhuman. Its proportions all wrong, limbs too long, torso too narrow. "Stop!" I said again, louder this time, finding courage in my growing anger. "This is my house now. You need to leave." A soft, rasping chuckle filled the room, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Your house? You know nothing of ownership, child. This lamp has been mine for centuries. I am bound to it, as you are now bound to me." The drawer slammed shut with such force that the entire dresser shuddered. The tall shadow glided across the room toward my bed, moving without touching the floor. I scrambled backward until my shoulders hit the headboard, nowhere left to retreat. It leaned over me, this thing made of shadow and ancient malice. I couldn't see a face, just a deeper darkness where features should have been. But I felt its gaze on me, heavy as stone. 3 nights, it whispered, its breath cold against my face, smelling of dust and age. 3 nights I come to you. On the 3rd night, you will understand what it means to be truly haunted. Then it was gone, dissipating like smoke in a strong wind, leaving me alone in the darkness with only the sound of my ragged breathing. This was the 2nd night. The next morning, I wasted no time. As soon as the antique shop opened, I was there with the brass lamp wrapped in a towel, my hands shaking as I placed it on the glass counter in front of Megan's uncle. Alex Parker was in his 60s, with a salt and pepper beard and wire-rimmed glasses that magnified his sharp blue eyes. The kind of man who looked like he belonged among the antiques he sold, a relic himself of a more dignified era. He unwrapped the lamp carefully, his expression changing from polite interest to intense focus as he examined it. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice unusually tense. "It was my grandmother's," I explained, watching as he turned the lamp over in his hands, studying the symbols etched into the brass. "I found it in her things after she passed." "Do you know what it is?" Alex was quiet for a long moment, running his fingertips over the strange markings. "These are protection sigils, very old ones. And this," he pointed to a series of curved symbols near the base, "is a binding spell in ancient Aramaic." My mouth went dry. Binding what exactly? Not what, who? Alex looked up at me, his expression grave. "This is an Iranian artifact, probably several hundred years old. It's called a jinn lamp. Like a genie? I asked, trying to smile, to make it sound ridiculous. Not like the friendly wish-granting kind from children's stories, Alex said grimly. In Middle Eastern folklore, jinn are powerful spirits, neither angel nor demon. Some benevolent, some malicious. This, he tapped the lamp, would have been used to trap a particularly troublesome entity. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the tall shadow looming over my bed, the dry, rasping voice promising a third visit. The warning about not polishing it after dark, I asked. Alex nodded. The traditions say that jinns are weakened by sunlight. Polishing the vessel that contains them after dark, when they're at full strength, can disturb them, weaken the binding. So if someone were to polish it at night, they might inadvertently release what's inside, at least partially. Alex looked at me sharply. Has something happened? I told him everything. The scratching sounds, the shadow figure, the promise of a third night. With each detail, Alex's expression grew more concerned. A third night is significant in many cultures, he said when I finished, his voice low and serious. It represents completion, a fulfillment of intention. What does it want? My voice cracked with fear. Freedom, most likely, Alex said. Or revenge for its imprisonment, or both. He disappeared into a back room, returning moments later with a weathered leather-bound book. Flipping through yellowed pages covered in handwritten notes and drawings, he finally stopped at an illustration that made my blood run cold. A tall, thin figure made of shadow, with elongated limbs and a featureless face. A shadow jinn, Alex murmured. One of the most dangerous kinds. They feed on fear and negative energy. The longer they're around humans, the stronger they become. How do I get rid of it? I asked desperately. Alex's response was interrupted by the jingling of the shop's bell as new customers entered. He closed the book quickly, wrapping the lamp back in the towel. Come back at closing time, he whispered. 5 o'clock. I need to do some research, make some calls. And whatever you do, don't go back to that house alone tonight. I spent the day wandering through Burlington, too anxious to sit still. I walked along Church Street, barely noticing the quaint shops and cafes that usually charmed me. Called Megan, who insisted I stay with her that night. Checked my watch obsessively until, finally, at 4:45, I headed back to the antique shop. The closed sign was already hanging in the window when I arrived. I knocked, then knocked again when there was no answer. The shop was dark inside, no sign of Alex. I tried the door, locked. Panic bloomed in my chest. Where was he? Had something happened? The weight of the brass lamp seemed to grow heavier in my bag, as if it were drawing energy from my fear. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. Alex called, emergency with a client. Said to tell you, put salt around the lamp and he'll see you first thing tomorrow. I stared at the message in disbelief. Salt? That was his emergency solution? Tonight was the third night, and all he could offer was table seasoning? But I had no better ideas. As darkness fell, I reluctantly drove back to my grandmother's house, stopping at a grocery store for the biggest container of salt they had. If this was my only defense, I was going to use plenty of it. The house stood silent and watchful as I approached. Windows like eyes tracking my movement up the walkway. Inside, I went directly to the kitchen table, emptied my bag, and created a thick circle of salt around the brass lamp. Then, for good measure, lined every windowsill and doorway with the white crystals. Night fell. I sat at the kitchen table, all lights blazing, watching the lamp in its circle of salt. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the minutes, then hours. The brass remained dull, untouched. No scratching sounds disturbed the silence. By 2 a.m., my eyelids were growing heavy, despite my fear. Maybe the salt was working? Maybe the entity couldn't approach the lamp. I rested my head on my arms, just for a moment. I jerked awake to the sound of the grandfather clock striking 3. The kitchen was dark. All the lights were out again. The only illumination came from the full moon shining through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. The lamp sat in its circle of salt, untouched. But something was wrong. The salt circle was broken in one place, a gap just wide enough for a finger to pass through. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound came from directly behind me. I froze, too terrified to turn around. The scratching continued, unhurried and deliberate as always. 3 nights, whispered that terrible dry voice directly into my ear, as promised. I whirled around, nearly falling off the chair in my panic. Nothing was there, just the empty kitchen bathed in moonlight. But the scratching sound continued, now seeming to come from the hallway. My heart pounding, I followed the noise. The grandfather clock showed 3:17 exactly, its pendulum swinging with hypnotic regularity. The scratching led me toward my grandmother's study, the room where I had first found the lamp. The door was ajar, moonlight spilling through the gap. As I approached, the scratching grew louder, more insistent. With trembling fingers, I pushed the door open. The study was transformed in the silvery moonlight. Shadows pooled in the corners like liquid darkness. Books lined the shelves, their spines like rows of sleeping sentinels. In the center of the room, seated at my grandmother's desk as if it belonged there, was the shadow. No longer just a vague humanoid shape, it had definition now. Still impossibly tall and thin, but with distinguishable features. A face like carved obsidian, all sharp angles and deep hollows. Eyes that reflected the moonlight like polished black stones. Long fingers that moved across the surface of the desk in that familiar circular motion. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was polishing the wood, around and around in perfect circles. As I watched, frozen in the doorway, it slowly raised its head to look at me. Its mouth curved into something approximating a smile, revealing teeth like shards of darkness. "You've been waiting," it said, its voice still that terrible dry rasp. "Good. So have I." "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "Want?" It tilted its head at an impossible angle, neck bending like a bird's. Such a human question. "I want what all imprisoned beings want. Freedom, justice, revenge." "I didn't imprison you," I said, finding a thread of courage in the fact that it was talking instead of attacking. "I just found the lamp, and opened it, and awakened me." The jinn's fingers continued their polishing motion. "Your blood runs in your veins. The same blood as the woman who bound me to that cursed brass prison centuries ago. My grandmother? No, that was impossible. The lamp was old, centuries old, according to Alex. But something in those obsidian eyes made me hesitate. My grandmother had always been secretive about her family history, about her travels, about the strange objects she collected. "Your grandmother," the jinn said, as if reading my thoughts. "And her grandmother before her, and hers before that. A long line of women who passed down their secrets, and their prisoners." It rose from the desk, unfolding to its full height, head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its form seemed to shift and flow like smoke given temporary substance. 3 nights I am permitted, when the seal is broken, 3 nights to walk the world again. Tonight is the 3rd night. Tonight I offer you a choice. I should have run, should have screamed. But something in its voice held me there, a hypnotic quality that made it impossible to look away from those terrible black eyes. "What choice?" I asked. It glided toward me, moving without taking steps. "The same choice I offered your grandmother, and every keeper before her. Become my new jailer. Take up the responsibility of keeping me bound, or release me, and end your family's obligation forever. If I release you, what happens? My mouth was so dry I could barely form the words. I go free, and you will never see me again. It was directly in front of me now, looming over me like a shadow made solid. But I have been imprisoned for centuries. My anger has grown with each passing decade. There would be consequences for this world. And if I become your jailer, I asked, though I already suspected the answer, then you bind yourself to me. You become responsible for keeping the lamp safe, for ensuring the binding remains strong, a burden your bloodline has carried for generations. My grandmother never told me, never warned me. Tears of anger and fear burned in my eyes. She tried. The jinn gestured toward the desk. The note she left, the warning about polishing after dark. She fell ill before she could fully prepare you, before she could pass on what you needed to know. I remembered my grandmother's sudden illness, how quickly she had declined. The doctors had been baffled, unable to diagnose what was wrong. She had tried to tell me something in those final days, grasping my hands with surprising strength, her eyes desperate and afraid. But the words never came. What happened to her, I asked, though I feared I already knew. She grew tired. All jailers do eventually. The responsibility weighs heavily. She considered releasing me. In her moment of weakness, I grew stronger. Perhaps I hastened her end. Perhaps not. A cold fury rose in me at the creature's casual admission. You killed her. I survived, as all beings strive to do when caged. It showed no remorse, only the patient malice of something that measures time in centuries rather than moments. Now you must choose, jailer or liberator. The decision must be made before dawn breaks. My mind raced. I thought of Alex's research, of the protection sigils on the lamp, of my grandmother's warning. I thought of the generations of women in my family who had apparently carried this burden in secret. How? I asked finally. How do I become the jailer? Something like disappointment flickered across the jinn's obsidian features. You must renew the binding, with blood freely given and words spoken with intent. It gestured toward my grandmother's desk drawer. Everything you need is there. She prepared it for you, hoping there would be time. I moved cautiously around the entity, keeping as much distance as possible. In the drawer, I found a small carved box, similar to the one that had held the lamp. Inside was a folded piece of parchment covered in the same flowing script I'd seen before, and a small silver knife with symbols etched into its blade. Read the words. Offer your blood to the lamp. The choice will be made, the jinn said. It remained motionless, watching me with those terrible reflective eyes. Dawn was approaching. I could see the faintest lightening of the sky through the study window. The jinn seemed aware of it too, a tension in its smoky form, a rippling of impatience. I unfolded the parchment with trembling fingers. The words were phonetically translated into English below the original script. I looked at the knife, its edge gleaming in the fading moonlight. What happens if I refuse both options? I asked, stalling for time as the sky grew imperceptibly lighter. Then the binding weakens with each passing day. I grow stronger. Eventually, I break free on my own terms. With no gratitude for your indecision. I looked down at the parchment again, at the knife, thought of my grandmother, of her strength, of her secrets, of the burden she had carried alone. I made my choice. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, painting golden light across the wooden floor of the study, I spoke the words written on the parchment. The ancient language felt strange on my tongue, but there was power in the syllables, a vibration that seemed to resonate in my bones. The jinn hissed, its form becoming less substantial as sunlight filled the room. It reached out with those impossibly long fingers, not toward me, but toward the knife in my hand. "Choose," it whispered, its voice fading. Before the moment passes, I gripped the knife tightly and made my choice. That was 3 months ago. Life has returned to something resembling normalcy since then. I still live in my grandmother's house. I still feel its history in every creaking board and drafty window. I've learned more about my family legacy from Alex, who has become a friend and mentor. Helped me understand the responsibility that has been passed down through generations of women in my family. The brass lamp sits on my mantelpiece now, polished and gleaming in the daylight hours, a reminder of choices made and burdens accepted. But sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, when the old house settles around me and the wind whispers through the eaves, I hear it. That soft, rhythmic sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. And I know I'm not alone. So remember, when you're lying in your bed tonight, listening to the sounds of your own home in the darkness, that not all hauntings are by ghosts. Sometimes the things that watch us from the shadows are much, much older and much more patient. If you're still awake right now, look at the time on your phone or clock. Is it close to 3:17 a.m.? If so, listen carefully. Is that just the house settling? Or something else? If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe to join our community of night wanderers. Leave a comment about any strange experiences you've had in the darkest hours. And share this with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes the things we find are actually finding us. Sleep well tonight. Or try to, anyway. Story number 3. Hey there, fellow night owls and thrill seekers. Before I begin tonight's story, I want to thank you for joining me in the dark. If you've ever had that feeling, you know the one, where something just isn't right in your own home, then this story might feel a little too familiar. Have you ever told someone about something inexplicable, only to have them dismiss you? Tell me in the comments if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain. Something that kept you up at night, wondering if you were losing your mind, or if something was watching you from the shadows. Now, get comfortable, dim your lights, and let me take you on a journey through my haunted experience. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss an upload. Sweet dreams, or perhaps not. The story begins now. I never believed in ghosts. That's important for you to understand. I was the skeptic, the rational one, the person who rolled their eyes at ghost hunting shows and paranormal podcasts. I had explanations for everything. Old houses settle, pipes knock, floorboards creak. Physics, not phantoms. That's what I told myself before I moved into 47 Oakwood Lane. The house was a steal, a charming 1920s craftsman in a historic neighborhood in Salem, Massachusetts, with dark wood trim and a covered porch perfect for summer evenings. When my realtor, Diane, showed me the property, sunlight streamed through leaded glass windows, casting rainbow prisms across original hardwood floors. It was love at first sight. Why is it priced so low? I asked, running my hand along the solid oak banister. The craftsmanship was impeccable, every detail lovingly preserved. Diane hesitated, just for a moment. The previous owners had to relocate suddenly for work. They're motivated sellers. I should have pressed harder. I should have asked more questions. But I was too enchanted by the built-in bookshelves and the window seat in what would become my home office. I signed the papers 2 weeks later. The first night was perfectly normal. I ordered pizza, unpacked my essentials, and fell asleep on the couch watching reruns of The Office. It was the second night when things began to feel off. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. exactly. The digital clock on my nightstand cast a red glow across unfamiliar walls. Something had pulled me from sleep, though I couldn't pinpoint what. The house was silent, yet the silence felt waited, expectant, like the pause before an orchestra begins to play. I lay perfectly still, listening. The heating system wasn't running. No cars passed outside. Just the sound of my own breathing, and beneath that, something else. Tap, 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 gentle, like fingernails against wood. Rhythmic, but not mechanical. It was coming from inside the wall beside my bed. It's an old house, I whispered to myself. Probably just the pipes. The tapping stopped immediately, as if whatever was causing it had heard me. I told myself it was coincidence. I rolled over, pulled the covers higher, and eventually drifted back to sleep. But in the morning, I found myself examining that wall, running my hands over the vintage floral wallpaper, searching for, I didn't know what. There were no water pipes in that wall. I discovered that later when I checked the home inspection report. The next few days passed without incident. I settled into a routine, unpacked my belongings, and began working from my home office. The house felt warm and welcoming during daylight hours. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen subway tile. Birds visited the backyard feeders, and the neighbor's golden retriever occasionally peered through the fence, tail wagging hopefully until I tossed him a treat. But nights were different. The tapping returned, always at 3:17 a.m. Sometimes it lasted only a few seconds, sometimes for minutes that stretched like hours as I lay frozen in bed, covers pulled to my chin. Eventually, exhaustion would claim me, and I'd wake in the morning half convinced I'd dreamed the whole thing. Then came the cold spots. Areas of the house where the temperature would suddenly plummet despite the thermostat reading normal. They moved, these pockets of frigid air. One day, the hallway would be ice cold, the next day the kitchen, then the living room. Following some pattern I couldn't decipher. Old houses have drafts, my friend Melissa said when she visited for coffee. My aunt's Victorian is the same way. You should get some weather stripping. I nodded, smiled, and didn't mention how the cold spots felt. Intentional. How they would appear when I was already feeling uneasy. How sometimes I'd walk through one and feel not alone. "You're being ridiculous," I told my reflection as I brushed my teeth that night. My face looked pale in the bathroom mirror, dark circles forming beneath my eyes from too many interrupted nights of sleep. The tapping came again at 3:17 a.m. Only this time it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from directly beneath my bed. I didn't scream. I wanted to, but fear had frozen my vocal cords, stolen my breath. Instead, I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs as the tapping continued below me. Tap, tap, tap. A deliberate rhythm, like a code I couldn't decipher. Gathering what little courage I had, I whispered into the darkness, "Hello?" The tapping stopped immediately. The silence that followed was worse somehow, expectant. I could feel something listening, waiting. Then my bed shifted slightly, as if something beneath it had moved. I was out of that room in seconds, stumbling down the stairs in darkness, nearly falling in my haste. I spent the remainder of the night on the living room couch, every light in the house blazing, the television murmuring for company. When morning came, I felt foolish. Sunlight poured through the windows and birds chirped cheerfully outside. How could I have been so frightened? It was probably just the house settling, or maybe a mouse had gotten in. Perfectly rational explanations. Still, I couldn't bring myself to look under the bed. Not yet. Instead, I called my brother, Michael, who lived an hour away in Boston. "Hey, want to come for dinner tonight? I'll make that pasta you like." "On a Tuesday? What's wrong?" Michael knew me too well. "Nothing's wrong. Can't I invite my brother over?" He arrived that evening with a bottle of wine and suspicious eyes. "Okay, spill it. What's going on? You hate cooking on weeknights." I hesitated. Michael was even more skeptical than I used to be. He was a software engineer who believed in logic, data, and little else. But I needed someone else in the house, someone to validate what I was experiencing. "I think something weird is going on with the house," I finally admitted, pouring us both generous glasses of Cabernet. "Weird how? Like plumbing weird or like maybe haunted weird?" Michael's eyebrows shot up, and then he laughed. It wasn't unkind, but it stung nevertheless. "Seriously, you, Miss There's a Scientific Explanation for Everything?" "I know how it sounds," I said, staring into my wine glass. "But there's tapping in the walls at night, always at exactly 3:17 a.m., and cold spots that move around the house. And last night, I think something was under my bed." Michael's smile faded as he realized I was genuinely disturbed. "Have you checked for mice? Or maybe raccoons in the attic? Old houses like this are basically wildlife condominiums." "It doesn't feel like animals," I said quietly. "Tell you what," Michael said, refilling our glasses. "I'll stay over tonight. If your ghost shows up, I'll help you figure out what's really going on." I felt a wave of relief. Someone else would be here. Someone else would witness whatever was happening. We stayed up late watching a movie, and Michael took the guest room across the hall from mine. I fell asleep more easily than I had in days, comforted by his presence. The alarm clock read 3:16 a.m. when I woke, 1 minute before the tapping usually began. I lay there, fully alert, waiting. 3:17 a.m. came and went. Nothing happened. No tapping, no cold spots, nothing out of the ordinary at all. I waited until 3:30, then crept across the hall to Michael's room. He was sound asleep, snoring softly. I returned to my bed, equal parts relieved and frustrated. Of course, nothing would happen the one night I had a witness. In the morning, Michael was triumphant. "See, no ghosts, just an old house making old house noises." "It doesn't happen every night," I said defensively, though that wasn't true. It had happened every night since I'd moved in until last night. Michael left after breakfast, and I spent the day working, trying to push away the nagging feeling that whatever was in the house had hidden itself intentionally, that it was smart enough to know it shouldn't reveal itself to Michael. That night, I left a digital voice recorder running beside my bed. 3:17 a.m. The tapping started again, louder than before. From the wall, then under the bed, then from the ceiling directly above me. I lay frozen, listening as it moved around the room, getting progressively faster and more insistent. "What do you want?" I finally whispered into the darkness. The tapping stopped immediately. Then my closet door, which I'd firmly closed before bed, slowly creaked open. I didn't stay to see what might emerge. I fled the room, spent another night on the couch with all the lights on. In the morning, I checked the voice recorder with shaking hands. I'd captured everything. The tapping moving around the room, my whispered question, the creak of the closet door. Proof, finally. I played it for Melissa when she came over for lunch. She listened carefully, her forehead creased in concern. Then she sighed. "Honey, I don't hear any tapping on this recording. Just you talking to yourself and what sounds like you rolling over in bed. But it's right there." I played it again, hearing the clear, distinct tapping that she somehow couldn't. Melissa placed her hand on mine. "Have you been sleeping okay? Starting a new job, moving to a new place? That's a lot of stress." I pulled my hand away, hurt by her implication. "I'm not making this up, Melissa, and I'm not stressed or sleep-deprived or whatever you're thinking. Something is in this house." She left shortly after, promising to check in on me later. Her eyes filled with concern that felt patronizing. I was alone again. Alone with whatever shared my house. That's when I decided to research the property's history. The Salem Public Library was housed in a grand Victorian building downtown, its reading room filled with polished wood tables and green-shaded lamps. I'd always found libraries comforting, repositories of knowledge, where any question could be answered if you knew where to look. I desperately needed answers now. I'm researching the history of my house, I told the reference librarian, an older woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a name tag that read Margaret, 47 Oakwood Lane. It's a 1920s craftsman. Property research? Margaret's eyes lit up. That's my specialty. We have city directories, deed records, newspaper archives. When did you want to start? As far back as possible, I said. I'm particularly interested in whether anything unusual ever happened there. Margaret gave me a knowing look. This was Salem, after all. The town's history was steeped in the supernatural, from the witch trials to modern-day ghost tours. Looking for skeletons in the closet, are we? If only she knew how literal that question felt. We started with deed records, tracing the property back to its construction in 1923. It had changed hands more frequently than seemed normal, with most owners staying less than 5 years. The most recent owners before me, the Hendersons, had lasted only 7 months. That's odd, I murmured, noting the pattern. Do you have access to old newspapers? I'd like to see if there were any articles about the house or its residents. Margaret led me to a microfilm reader and showed me how to search the archives. For hours, I scrolled through decades of Salem news, looking for any mention of my address. The first article I found was from 1927, a small piece about the original owner, Franklin Miller, a clockmaker who'd apparently committed suicide in the house. He'd been found hanging in the upstairs hallway directly outside what was now my bedroom. His pocket watch had stopped at 3:17 a.m. My hands trembled as I continued searching. 1943. A child had gone missing from the home, never to be found. 1968. A woman claimed her husband had been possessed after moving into the house, becoming violent and erratic before disappearing one night. 1985. Another suicide, this time in the basement. Pattern after pattern emerged. Families moved in hopeful, then reports of strange behavior, complaints to neighbors about noises in the night, and finally, tragedy or hasty departures. Not with every owner, but often enough to be far beyond coincidence. I was so absorbed in my research that I jumped when Margaret touched my shoulder. The library was closing. I'd been there for 6 hours. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked, eyeing the notes I'd scribbled. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "Of course." She hesitated, then added, "You know, if you're interested in local history of the unusual variety, you might want to talk to Edward Barnes. He runs the occult bookshop on Essex Street. Bit of an eccentric, but he knows more about Salem's darker history than anyone." I thanked her and left, my mind racing with what I'd discovered. The original owner had been a clockmaker. That explained the tapping. It was rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock. And the time, 3:17 a.m. when he'd died. But why was it happening now? Why to me? I was so distracted that I didn't notice how dark it had gotten, how the streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk as I walked to my car. I didn't notice the figure standing across the street, watching me, until I was unlocking my car door. It was a man, tall, thin, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned clothes. He stood perfectly still beneath the streetlight, his face in shadow. As I stared, he raised his hand slowly, deliberately. A small gesture, almost like a greeting, or a warning. I blinked, and he was gone. Just an empty stretch of sidewalk where he'd stood seconds before. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I didn't want to go home. But where else could I go? Michael would think I'd lost my mind if I showed up at his door babbling about ghosts and mysterious figures. Melissa already thought I was suffering from stress-induced delusions. I was alone in this, truly alone. As I pulled into my driveway, the house loomed before me, windows dark and empty. Had I left it that way? I couldn't remember. For the first time since moving in, it didn't look charming or welcoming. It looked hungry. I sat in my car for a long time, engine running, heater blowing, trying to work up the courage to go inside. Finally, I took a deep breath, grabbed my library notes, and walked up the porch steps on legs that felt like they might give way beneath me. The house was silent as I entered, flicking on lights as I moved from room to room. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. No signs of ghostly activity, no tapping, no cold spots. Just an ordinary house at night. "I know you're here," I said aloud, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. "I know about Franklin Miller. I know what happened to you." Nothing responded. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing outside. I made myself a strong cup of tea and spread my notes on the kitchen table, determined to make sense of what was happening. If this was Franklin Miller's ghost, why was he haunting me? What did he want? And were there others? The missing child, the possessed husband, the basement suicide? As I read through my timeline of the house's history, a chill ran down my spine. Every tragedy, every disappearance, every suicide had occurred exactly 17 years apart. 1927, 1944, 1961, 1978, 1995, 2012. And now it was 2029. A pattern, a cycle, and I had moved in just in time for it to begin again. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Instead, I drove to a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town and sat in a vinyl booth until dawn, drinking cup after cup of mediocre coffee, my notes spread before me. By the time sun streamed through the diner's windows, I had a plan. A desperate one, perhaps, but I was beyond caring about how crazy it might seem. The occult corner was tucked between a tourist gift shop and a coffee house on Essex Street. Its windows were filled with crystals, tarot cards, and leather-bound books. A small sign in the door announcing "Open." I took a deep breath and entered, a small bell jingling overhead. The shop smelled of incense and old paper, shelves crammed with books reaching to the ceiling. Behind a cluttered counter stood a man who could only be Edward Barnes, tall and rail-thin with a shock of white hair and round spectacles perched on a prominent nose. "Welcome," he said, his voice surprisingly deep. "Just browsing, or looking for something specific?" "Margaret from the library suggested I speak with you," I said, approaching the counter. "I'm researching the history of my house, 47 Oakwood Lane." Edward's expression changed subtly. A tightening around the eyes, a slight straightening of his posture. "Ah, the Miller house. When did you move in?" 3 weeks ago," he nodded slowly. "And it started already, hasn't it? The tapping, the cold spots, the sense of being watched." My legs nearly gave out from under me. Finally, someone who believed me, someone who knew. "How did you— You're not the first owner to come here seeking answers," Edward said, gesturing to a small sitting area in the back of the shop. "Please, sit. This might take a while." For the next hour, Edward filled in the gaps in my research, revealing a history far darker than what I'd found in newspaper archives. Franklin Miller hadn't been just a clockmaker. He'd been obsessed with time itself, with finding ways to manipulate it, to harness its power. There were rumors, Edward said, that he practiced a form of magic, binding spirits to the house to power his experiments. When his wife threatened to leave him to expose what he was doing, he killed her and then himself. "But the newspaper said he committed suicide," I protested. Edward smiled grimly. "Newspapers don't always print the whole truth, especially not in the 1920s. Salem had been trying to distance itself from its witch trial past. The last thing the town wanted was another supernatural scandal. According to Edward, the house existed in what he called a thin place, a location where the boundary between our world and something else was permeable. Miller had exploited this, using it to fuel his obsession. Every 17 years the boundary grows thinner, Edward explained. The spirits Miller bound become stronger, able to affect our world more directly. They seek a vessel, someone to use. The missing child? The possessed husband? The suicides? I asked, connecting the dots. Edward nodded gravely. All victims of the cycle. The house chooses someone vulnerable, someone it can manipulate, and then... He didn't need to finish. I knew what came next in the pattern. How do I stop it? I demanded. There must be a way. Edward hesitated. There are rituals, protections that might help. But the most effective solution is the simplest: leave. Sell the house, walk away, break the cycle. I can't sell the house knowing what might happen to the next owner, I said firmly. And I can't afford to just abandon it. There has to be another way. Edward studied me for a long moment, then sighed. There is one possibility. The original binding ritual used objects of significance to Miller, his tools, his personal possessions. If those objects were removed from the house, destroyed in a specific way, what objects? Where would I find them after all this time? That's the problem. Most likely hidden somewhere in the house itself. Miller would have concealed them, protected them. I thought of the tapping that always started in the wall beside my bed. I think I might know where to start looking. Edward gave me a list of what to look for: Miller's pocket watch, his clock-making tools, a specific journal with a symbol embossed on its cover. He also provided instructions for a protection ritual: salt lines, blessed candles, specific words to recite. Be careful, he warned as I rose to leave. The spirits will know what you're trying to do. They'll fight back. I'm already fighting, I said. I'm just tired of fighting alone. I spent the day preparing. I drew salt lines across every threshold, placed blessed candles at the cardinal points of the house, and recited the protective words Edward had taught me. As sunset approached, I gathered the tools I would need: a hammer, a pry bar, a flashlight. The wall beside my bed, where the tapping always began, that would be my starting point. Night fell. I sat on the edge of my bed, tools beside me, waiting. The digital clock on my nightstand flicked through the minutes. 3:14, 3:15, 3:16. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the tapping began. But tonight, instead of freezing in fear, I spoke directly to it. I know who you are, Franklin Miller. I know what you did, and I'm going to stop you. The tapping intensified, became a pounding that shook the walls. The temperature in the room plummeted until I could see my breath clouding before me. Pictures rattled on the walls, and the light from my bedside lamp flickered wildly. I stood, hammer in hand, and approached the wall. You don't scare me anymore. A lie, but a necessary one. I swung the hammer at the wall, punching through vintage wallpaper and plaster. Again and again I struck, revealing the wooden laths beneath. And beyond that, a small cavity in the wall. The house's reaction was immediate and violent. A gust of wind tore through the room, though all windows were closed. My bedside lamp crashed to the floor. From downstairs came the sound of breaking glass. I shone my flashlight into the cavity and saw it, a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols similar to what Edward had shown me. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Something grabbed my wrist, an invisible force, cold as ice, gripping me with surprising strength. I cried out, more in shock than pain, and struggled against it. "Let go!" I shouted. "This house is mine now." The pressure increased. I could feel bruises forming beneath those invisible fingers. With my free hand, I grabbed the container of salt I'd kept nearby and flung it toward the invisible presence. There was a sound. Not quite a scream, more like the high-pitched whine of machinery under stress, and the pressure on my wrist vanished. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the box and ran. Downstairs in the kitchen, I placed the box on the table and carefully opened it. Inside lay exactly what Edward had described: a pocket watch, its hands frozen at 3:17, a set of delicate clock-making tools, and a small leather-bound journal with a strange symbol embossed on its cover. As I lifted the watch, the house seemed to hold its breath. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. The walls creaked around me, and from upstairs came a sound like footsteps, slow and deliberate. Following Edward's instructions, I worked quickly. I placed the items in a cast-iron pot, covered them with salt and herbs he had provided, and set them alight with one of the blessed candles. The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. A howl of rage tore through the house, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The kitchen cabinets flew open, dishes shattering as they were flung across the room. The lights exploded in showers of sparks, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the flames consuming Miller's possessions. I stood my ground, reciting the words Edward had taught me, a banishment as old as time itself. The house shuddered around me, like an animal in pain. The flames in the pot burned impossibly bright, casting wild shadows across the walls. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The silence was absolute, broken only by my ragged breathing and the gentle crackle of the flames as they died down, having consumed everything in the pot. I stood in my dark kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and scattered belongings, waiting for something more to happen. Minutes passed. Nothing. No tapping, no cold spots, no sense of being watched. For the first time since I'd moved in, the house felt empty. Truly empty, except for me. I sank into a kitchen chair, exhaustion washing over me. Had it worked? Was it over? I was afraid to believe it, afraid to hope. As dawn broke, filling my kitchen with golden light, I finally felt brave enough to move through the house, checking each room. Everything was still, peaceful. No sign remained of Franklin Miller or his bound spirits, though the physical damage from their final rage was evident in the broken dishes, shattered light bulbs, and the hole I'd smashed in my bedroom wall. It would take time to repair the house, to erase these physical reminders of what had happened. But as I stood on my front porch, watching the sunrise over the neighborhood, I felt something I hadn't experienced since moving in. Peace. The house behind me was just a house now. My house. The cycle was broken. I had stopped what Franklin Miller started over a century ago. The next 17-year mark would come and go without incident. As I sipped my morning coffee on the porch, my neighbor walked by with his golden retriever. He waved, and for the first time, I waved back without reservation, without the shadow of what lurked inside hanging over me. "Beautiful morning," he called. I smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. Yes, it really is. So there you have it, friends. My experience with a house that was more than just a house, with a haunting that no one believed until I found the courage to believe in myself. Sometimes the most terrifying ghosts are the ones we face alone, the experiences we can't share because others simply won't understand. Have you ever felt something unexplainable? Have you ever known something to be true, even when everyone around you insisted it couldn't be? Share your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one, and you never know. Your story might inspire my next video. If you enjoyed this tale of things that go bump in the night, hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you're brave enough, share this with someone who needs a delicious chill down their spine tonight. Sweet dreams. And remember to check inside your walls before bed. You never know what might be hiding there, waiting to be found. Story number 4. Have you ever driven through a small town and felt like something wasn't quite right? Like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for you to pass through so it could exhale? There are places across America that seem to exist in the spaces between. Towns that appear on old maps but not new ones. Villages that vanish like morning mist when the sun rises. Tonight's story might keep you up wondering about those forgotten places. Or it might lull you into dreams where lost towns live again. Either way, I hope you'll share your own strange small-town experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoy getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, subscribe for more tales that live in the shadows between reality and imagination. Now, let's begin our journey to a place that no longer exists. The first time I saw Millwood Creek, it wasn't supposed to be there at all. I was driving through the Appalachian foothills of Virginia, taking the scenic route from Washington, D.C. back to my parents' home in Nashville. It was late October. The trees were aflame with autumn colors, and a light mist hung in the valleys. I had been on the road for 6 hours straight and needed a break. My GPS showed nothing nearby, but when I spotted a weathered wooden sign reading Millwood Creek, 2 miles, I decided to take my chances. The exit was easy to miss, just a narrow 2-lane road winding into a valley. As I descended, the mist grew thicker, swallowing the tops of the trees. After a few minutes of driving, Millwood Creek revealed itself. A small main street lined with brick buildings from another era, none newer than the 1950s. Vintage-style street lamps cast pools of yellow light through the mist. The town looked like a film set, too perfect in its antiquated charm. I parked in front of a diner called Betty's Home Cooking. Through the windows, I could see a few customers scattered among the booths. As I stepped out of my car, the air felt different. Heavier, the kind of damp cold that seeps into your bones. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. Conversation stopped. Every head turned toward me. I smiled awkwardly and made my way to the counter, feeling the weight of their stares. "Just passing through?" asked the waitress. A woman in her 50s with hair the color of iron filings and eyes that had seen too much. "Yeah, heading to Nashville. Thought I'd grab some coffee." I glanced at her name tag. "Betty?" She nodded slowly. "The very same. Coffee's fresh. Made it 10 minutes ago." As she poured me a cup, I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. The other customers had resumed their conversations, but they were hushed now, and I couldn't shake the feeling they were talking about me. When I asked for the restroom, Betty directed me past an actual working payphone, a relic I hadn't seen in years. Flipping through the attached phone book, I noticed something odd. Every business had the same prefix, and the entire town directory took up less than 2 pages. After returning to my coffee, I tried to make conversation. "Nice town you have here, very preserved." "We like it that way," Betty replied. "No need for change when things work just fine as they are." I took a sip of coffee. "I'm surprised I've never heard of Millwood Creek before. It's not on my GPS." Betty's hand paused in its wiping. "Those new gadgets don't know everything. This town's been here longer than anyone can remember." "Do many tourists come through?" "Some," she said carefully. "Not everyone sees the turnoff. Some drive right past, even with the sign plain as day." An elderly man entered and made his way to the counter, taking the stool beside mine. "This the one?" he asked Betty, not bothering to lower his voice. "Mr. Holloway, this is—" Betty looked at me expectantly. "Alex," I supplied. "Alex Mercer." "Alex is just passing through," Betty told him. "On the way to Nashville." Mr. Holloway studied me intently. "Got family waiting for you?" "Just my parents. I'm supposed to be there by tomorrow afternoon." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Better get back on the road soon then. Storm's coming. These mountain roads get treacherous when it rains." I glanced out the window. The mist had thickened, but there was no sign of rain. "Weather app doesn't show any storms." Mr. Holloway made a dismissive sound. "My knees know more about the weather than any app. Been predicting storms for 70 years. I decided not to argue. I finished my coffee, paid, and stood to leave. "Keep to the main road, young man," Mr. Holloway called after me. "Some of these back roads, they don't always lead where they're supposed to." Outside, the fog had become so thick I could barely see across the street. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone to check messages. No signal. But something else caught my eye. The GPS map showed nothing but wilderness where Millwood Creek should be. According to my phone, I was parked in the middle of a forest. I started the car and followed Main Street back the way I had come. Or at least, I thought it was the way I'd come. After 5 minutes of driving, I should have reached the junction with the highway. Instead, Main Street curved in a direction I didn't remember, leading deeper into town. I made a U-turn, certain I'd missed the turnoff. But as I drove back, the scenery seemed to shift. The buildings were the same, yet somehow arranged differently. I passed Betty's Diner again, but now it was on the opposite side of the street. A tap on my window nearly made me jump out of my skin. It was a young girl, maybe 12 or 13, with pale blonde hair and a yellow raincoat. I rolled down the window. "Are you lost?" she asked, her voice small and clear. "I'm trying to get back to the highway," I admitted. She nodded solemnly. "People often get turned around in the fog. You need to go back to the town square and take Jefferson Street north." Town square? I don't remember passing through a square. "It's the heart of Millwood Creek," she said. "Every road leads there, eventually." I thanked her and was about to roll up the window when she added, "Better hurry, you don't want to be here after dark." I followed her directions and eventually found the town square, a small park with a bronze statue of a man on horseback. Taking Jefferson Street north as instructed, I drove past increasingly sparse houses with ancient oak trees between them. Then the pavement ended abruptly. My tires crunched on gravel, then dirt. The road had become a narrow forest path barely wide enough for my car. I stopped, unsure whether to continue or turn back. As I deliberated, my headlights illuminated a wooden bridge spanning a ravine. It looked old, but solid enough. Beyond it, the path continued up a slope and disappeared into the trees. I decided to trust the girl's directions and proceeded cautiously over the bridge. The wooden planks groaned under my car's weight but held firm. As I reached the other side, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The bridge was gone. In its place was unbroken forest, as if it had never existed at all. My heart began to race. This was impossible. I pulled over and got out, walking back to where the bridge should have been. But there was nothing. Just more trees with no sign a bridge had ever existed. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest. Then another, closer. Something was moving toward me through the trees. I ran back to my car and sped up the path, no longer caring where it led as long as it was away from here. The path climbed steadily, winding up the hillside. The trees thinned, allowing glimpses of the valley below. I could see Millwood Creek spread out beneath me, a cluster of lights in a sea of fog. As I watched, a strange phenomenon began. One by one, the lights of Millwood Creek began to wink out, as if someone was moving through town, methodically extinguishing every lamp and porch light. The darkness spread from the edges inward, gradually consuming the town. Then I noticed a line of lights moving up the hillside, not on any road that I could see, but cutting straight through the forest. A procession of some kind, the lights bobbing like lanterns carried by hand, and they were heading in my direction. I gunned the engine, taking the increasingly steep path as fast as I dared. The path eventually leveled out at the top of the hill. Ahead lay a straight stretch leading into dense pine trees that formed a tunnel of darkness. I accelerated into it, branches scraping against my car. I drove for what felt like hours through that tunnel of trees. When I finally emerged, I found myself on a paved road, the highway. I pulled over, my hands shaking too badly to drive. According to my car's clock, it was just past midnight. But that couldn't be right. It had been around 4 p.m. when I stopped in Millwood Creek. My phone buzzed to life, suddenly flooded with signal. I called my mother, who answered immediately. "Alex, where have you been? We've been worried sick." "I'm sorry," I said. I took a detour through a small town and got a bit lost in the fog. What town? We tried to track your phone, but it showed you in the middle of nowhere. A place called Millwood Creek, just off Highway 81. There was a pause. Alex, are you sure about that name? Positive. Why? Mom's voice dropped to a whisper. Because I grew up not far from there. Millwood Creek burned down in the 1970s. There's nothing left but foundations in the forest. I reached Nashville by mid-morning, having driven through the night. After a few hours of restless sleep, I began researching online. Millwood Creek had indeed been destroyed by fire in 1972. Nearly 300 people perished. The few survivors reported strange circumstances, all roads out of town leading back in, vehicles failing to start, phones going dead. What disturbed me most were the names in the list of casualties. Betty Holloway, owner of the local diner. Thomas Holloway, her father-in-law, and Sarah Parker, age 12, last seen wearing a yellow raincoat. These were the people I had spoken to, people who had died half a century ago. My research revealed something even more disturbing. Millwood Creek wasn't the only town in the region to meet a tragic end. Over the past 100 years, 3 other small communities within a 30-mile radius had vanished, one to flooding, another evacuated due to toxic waste, and a third abandoned after a mine collapse. In each case, there were rumors of strange phenomena before the disaster: unusual fog, electrical disturbances, people reporting time seeming to slow down or speed up. I found a local history forum where people shared stories about these ghost towns. One user claimed to have driven through a fully intact Cloverton 10 years after it had been submerged. Another described picking up a hitchhiker outside Porter's Mill only to later recognize the man's face in a newspaper article about the mine collapse from 1952. Most disturbing were the accounts of Millwood Creek. A dozen different people reported encountering the town over the years, always while driving in fog. Always the same description: buildings from the 1950s, unfriendly locals, difficulty finding the way out, and always the same warning: you don't want to be here after dark. A recent post caught my eye. Has anyone else noticed the fog in Millwood Creek moving? I swear it's spreading beyond the old town boundaries. I traced the locations of all 4 vanished towns on a map. They formed an almost perfect square, with a 5th point in the center, a nameless peak marked only with an elevation number. My father entered the study as I was contemplating this pattern. Still obsessing over that town? He asked. Your mother's never liked talking about that area. Her father was one of the first responders to the Millwood Creek fire. He was never the same afterward. What do you mean? He wouldn't talk about what he saw there, but he started having nightmares, became obsessed with the idea that the fire hadn't been an accident. He compiled this whole file of similar incidents in the region. Do you know what happened to that file? Dad nodded toward a closet. Your mother kept it after he passed. I found a battered cardboard box labeled Dad's Research. Inside were hundreds of newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, maps, and photographs. My grandfather had documented not just the 4 vanished towns, but dozens of smaller incidents, unexplained disappearances, strange lights, unusual weather patterns. One yellowed clipping from 1897 caught my eye. Local man claims ancient evil dwells in hills. The article detailed the ravings of a hermit who insisted that something older than the mountains themselves lived beneath the hills, something that fed on fear and tragedy and could make a place exist and not exist at the same time. Most disturbing was my grandfather's journal about the Millwood Creek fire, the entry that made my blood run cold. We found no bodies. 300 people supposedly died in that fire, but we found no remains, not one. The buildings were burned to the foundations, but where were the people? Williams thinks they escaped somehow, but I know better. I saw them in the smoke, their faces, watching us. And I saw something else, something moving in the heart of the fire that wasn't burning. It was feeding. I formed a theory, one so outlandish I was hesitant to even consider it. What if these towns hadn't simply experienced disasters? What if something had consumed them? Not just the buildings and people, but their very existence in our reality. And what if, sometimes, these consumed places could still be accessed? It would explain how I'd visited a town that had burned down decades ago. It would explain the disorienting effects, the strange behavior of the residents, the warnings not to stay after dark. But it raised a more troubling question. What happened to these places when night fell? What was the procession of lights I'd seen moving up the hillside? I decided I needed to go back. Not to enter Millwood Creek again, but to observe it from a safe distance. First, though, I needed help. I contacted a friend from college, Dr. Eliza Chen, who studied paranormal phenomena from a sociological perspective. 2 days later, Eliza, her colleague Dr. Marcus Reed, a geologist, and I set out for the Appalachian foothills. We were equipped with scientific instruments to monitor any unusual phenomena. We found the general area where I had encountered Millwood Creek, though the turnoff was now invisible. Just dense forest on both sides of the highway. Hiking in, we eventually discovered an overgrown road that led us to the actual ruins of Millwood Creek, crumbling foundations, a few brick chimneys, and the faint grid pattern of streets reclaimed by nature. "This is not where I was," I said, looking around in confusion. The town I saw was intact, buildings, streetlights, people. "This is all that's left in our reality," Eliza said softly, "but perhaps under certain conditions, what once existed here can still be accessed." We set up our equipment in what had been the town square and waited as sunset approached. A light mist began to form between the trees. As the last direct sunlight faded, I noticed something strange. Certain angles and shadows seemed to suggest structures that weren't physically present, like architectural ghosts, visible only from the corner of one's eye. "Are you seeing this?" I whispered. "The mist is creating pareidolia effects," Dr. Reed said, but he sounded unsure. Eliza was staring at her equipment. "The EM readings are spiking, and the temperature is dropping rapidly." A sound reached us then, distant at first, then growing clearer. Voices calling to one another, the slam of a door, a dog barking. Normal town sounds, coming from a place where no town existed. "We need to leave," Eliza said urgently. But before we could move, the mist surged forward like a living thing, enveloping us in seconds. The ruins had vanished, replaced by solid structures looming in the mist. Millwood Creek was materializing around us. There were people now, shadowy figures moving along the sidewalks, some stopping to stare at us with hollow eyes that reflected no light. "They see us," Eliza whispered. "They know we don't belong." The figures began to move toward us with clear purpose. Their movements were wrong somehow, too fluid in some places, too jerky in others, as if they were being puppeted by something that didn't fully understand how human bodies should move. We ran toward the hillside I remembered from my previous visit. The streets rearranged themselves as we ran, buildings sliding into new positions, alleyways appearing and disappearing. "The readings are off the charts," Eliza gasped. "Whatever this is, it's bending reality at a quantum level." We turned a corner and found ourselves facing the town square. The bronze statue at its center had changed, no longer a man on horseback, but a twisted, elongated figure with too many limbs, reaching toward the darkening sky. We sprinted across the square toward a street leading uphill. The buildings along the way began transforming, aging backward through time. Victorian houses became colonial homes, then log cabins, then nothing but cleared land. "It's showing us its history," Dr. Reed realized, going back to when it first formed. Yet, still, there were people shadow figures dressed in bygone styles, all turning to watch us pass, all with the same hollow eyes. "They're hurting us," I realized. This is what they tried to do to me last time, drive me toward something on the other side of the bridge. I made a split-second decision. We need to go off the path, into the untouched forest. We plunged into the dense underbrush. Behind us, the humming grew louder, angrier. But the pursuers didn't follow into the virgin forest. They stopped at the tree line, their hollow eyes watching as we fled. After what felt like hours, we stumbled into a clearing and collapsed. Eliza checked her equipment. The readings are normalizing. I think we're outside its influence now. I noticed something strange in the clearing. A circular arrangement of stones, ancient and moss-covered, yet clearly placed deliberately. Native American, perhaps, Dr. Reed suggested. I don't think so, Eliza said. These symbols aren't Cherokee. They're much older. Carved into each stone was a flowing script unlike any language I recognized. The symbols seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. This is what my grandfather was trying to understand, I realized. Whatever consumes these towns, the Native Americans knew about it. They marked its territory. A twig snapped at the edge of the clearing. A young girl in a yellow raincoat stepped into the moonlight. Sarah Parker, the girl who had died 50 years ago. You shouldn't have come back, she said. It wants new places, new people. It's getting stronger. Which town is next? I asked. The one you came from. Her eyes met mine. But it can be stopped. That's why I'm still here. Why we're all still here. Part of it, but not consumed completely. How? Eliza asked. Sarah turned to the stone circle. The original people knew. They built these markers, created a boundary, but the stones have been moved, destroyed over time. There's another way, she continued, fixing her gaze on me. The center, where all the missing towns connect. Beneath the mountain, there's a cave. That's where we all end up in the end. If we find this cave, I began, what then? Break the circle from within, reverse the binding. She stiffened suddenly. It knows I'm talking to you. It's coming. The mist began to creep into the clearing. Run, Sarah said. Find the cave. Follow the old paths, not the roads, but the trails the original people made. You have until the next dark moon. 3 days. Then she was gone, and we were alone with the encroaching fog. By dawn, we had reached our vehicle in safety. Eliza was already forming a plan. Other survivors, she said. There must be others who've encountered this thing and lived. We start there. Within a day, we had assembled a team of 7 each with their own encounter story, each with skills that might help us. A retired forest ranger who knew the old trails. An archaeologist specializing in pre-Columbian cultures. A physicist whose theories about localized reality distortions had cost her her academic career. We gathered in my parents' basement, planning our expedition to the heart of the entity's domain. Each of us understood the risks, each committed despite them. As midnight approached, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The Nashville skyline glittered in the distance, the city oblivious to the threat gathering in the hills hundreds of miles away. I thought of Sarah Parker, trapped for 50 years between existence and non-existence. Of all the vanished towns and their lost populations, hundreds, perhaps thousands of souls waiting for release. Tomorrow, we would head back to the Appalachian foothills. We would find the cave beneath the nameless peak. And somehow we would break the circle from within. I had no illusions about our chances. We were going up against something ancient and powerful, something that had been consuming entire communities for centuries. But we had knowledge it didn't expect us to have. Allies it couldn't anticipate. We're coming, I promised the night sky. Hold on a little longer. As I turned to go back inside, a strange reflection caught my eye. A distant yellow shape at the end of the street, gone when I blinked. A reminder, perhaps, or a warning. Did you feel that chill? That sense of something watching from just beyond the edge of your vision? The mystery of Millwood Creek remains unsolved to this day. Some say if you drive through the Appalachian foothills on a foggy evening, you might still catch a glimpse of its lights through the mist. Others claim to have met a young girl in a yellow raincoat, warning them to leave before dark. But no one knows what happened to Alex Mercer and the team that ventured beneath the nameless peak. Their car was found abandoned at a trailhead, their equipment scattered nearby. Search parties combed the area for weeks but found no trace of the missing group. Strangely, in the 3 years since their disappearance, no towns have vanished. No communities have reported the creeping fog that presages consumption. Perhaps they succeeded in their mission. Perhaps they failed and became part of the entity themselves. Or perhaps the hunger is merely sleeping, gathering strength for its next feeding. If you've experienced something similar, a town that shouldn't exist, people who seem caught in an endless loop, fog that follows you home, share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to hear more tales from the shadows, from places that exist in the spaces between what is and what once was. And if you're driving through unfamiliar mountains and see a sign for a town not on your map, perhaps it's best to keep going, at least until morning.